Hello, my name is Patrick. I'm an associate director at Wayfair. I work in the data science group on measurement and attribution, which I always joke are words that mean almost nothing to the vast majority of humans and describe almost nothing about what we actually do. But that's simply what my job is. OK, so what I want to talk to you today is about creating a consistent interview, and specifically about how Wayfair is trying to deal with bias and noise at an institutional level in our data science hiring pipeline to make sure we're actually doing the best job we can on selecting the right experts to come and work on our teams. So before I begin, a little bit about Wayfair itself. Wayfair is a pretty large company these days, but it's a furniture retailer, an online furniture retailer, right? So we live in the magical age where I can literally go on my cell phone, I can go to a website, I can browse for home goods, including like a sofa or a sectional. I can click on them, purchase them using Apple Pay, and have them delivered by the same company within 2 days into my apartment, right? And that's just a world like when I was younger, I never imagined would happen because we were in a world where couches were custom made, and they took like ages and ages and ages to be delivered, and things were messy. So that's what Wayfair does. And we have vast, vast arrays of things that you can actually buy for your home. And what many people don't know about Wayfair is that we actually are a family of brands. So in addition to Wayfair, we are Joss & Main, Birch Lane, All Modern, Perigold. And all of these brands are sort of meant for different people for how they want to style their homes. And Wayfair's been doing pretty well. We've had some pretty awesome growth. So last year, we booked about $6.7 billion in revenue. And this year, we're doing pretty well so far. And we've come a long way, right? Like if we go back to 2014, we had about $1 billion in revenue. So we're growing pretty fast. And with that growth always comes interesting problems. But we also get very cool stuff from it. So now that we've kind of become big, we have a lot of data. So we have 4 terabytes of data captured basically daily. We serve 3 billion Google ads a month. You've probably seen our ads. And we have a huge amount of tagged images that are classified, clickstream data, millions of products in our catalog. And all of this is stuff that is obviously like the purview for a model-based business. And so we have a pretty large data team, actually, at this point. So we, as the data scientists, work on all sorts of things, from merchandising and personalization to pricing and marketing and computer vision, operations research, ML systems, the stuff I do about measurement and attribution. And also, we have an entire contingent in the EU who works on similar type things. And that means we've gotten pretty large. So we're over 100 people nowadays just on the data science team. And we're from all over the world. We're a pretty diverse team. And we're also from a lot of academic backgrounds. So we come from traditional, what we might think of as data science things, mathematics, computer science, and physical science, but also economics, engineering, operations research, cognitive sciences, these sorts of things. And so we're a pretty diverse group of people. And much like Wayfair, we've been growing very quickly. So this is essentially what our headcount has looked like over the last 6 years. Back in 2012, it was a very small team, right? And today, it's well over 100 people, and we're a diverse lot. And that's awesome. That's amazing. But that also has some downsides, right? And the honest truth is that to grow like that means that people like me spend a lot of time in interviews, right? Like these people don't just magically appear on your doorstep, right? Like it's a process in order to actually get them into your company. And just to make sure everyone's on the same page, because I'm going to talk a lot about interviews, Wayfair has a very standard process for interviews. There's sourcing, then there's resume review, then there's a phone screen, then there's a technical phone screen, then there's on-sites, normally 3 to 6 of them with actual data scientists, right? And this is for one candidate to go through the funnel, and we're trying at any given time to put many candidates through the funnel, right? So what are some downsides to having to run this sort of thing? Well, the first one is obviously time. So if we look at putting a candidate through the full funnel here, in just the room with the candidate, we're probably going to spend 5 to 10 hours. And when we incorporate all of the extra work that goes into actually finding the candidates and communicating with them and setting things up, we're actually talking that often this could be the equivalent of something like 15 to 20% of someone's full-time job, basically just doing this per person we want to shove through this pipeline, right? So that's really painful, right? Like that's a lot of time that we spend on this. There's another challenge with interviews, which is this is basically what the distribution of experience at Wayfair in terms of how many interviews people have actually conducted looks like, right? And this is probably what it looks like at most companies. There's like, okay, well, yeah, there's some people who are really experienced. They've given a lot, right? And then there's lots and lots of people who haven't given that many, right? Because we're growing sort of exponentially, many, many more people are walking in the door who have never given an interview than we have experienced people who have given a lot of interviews. And so we have to figure out ways to actually scale up training so that all of those new people can be trained, because otherwise those poor 3 people with lots of experience would spend all of their days training those new people, right? And that's not very effective. Those are data scientists. They're expensive. We want them to actually work on things that move the business, not just hiring. So we have to figure out how to do scaling and training. And then there's another problem, and that's bias. And I think this is not the topic of the talk, but I just want to address it because it's very important. So there has been a huge amount of research on bias. There's been a huge amount of research on how to deal with bias. I would hope that everyone in the room who is interviewing has read this research, has thought about how to deal with it. Things like using a rubric, writing your feedback independently, writing your feedback immediately after you sort of do the interview, and then syncing all of your feedback after you've made conclusions at the end are just generally good practices that cost very little and are important to do. The number of companies I have seen where this is not what they do is quite large. But please do this. That's not the point of the talk. And just to make a point of this, like when I say there's plenty of research on this, like there was a study in 1987 at the University of Texas. And the medical school there was going to admit 150 applicants, right? So they selected their 150, they sent them out, they interviewed a whole bunch. They were like, these are the ones, great. And then the state legislature told them, we have a shortage of physicians. You have to admit 200 people. And so after they had ranked everyone, and after they had sent rejections to people, they had to go back and find another 50 people to fill in the program, okay? And medical school is a complicated business, right? Like many medical schools want the same candidates. So of those 50 they found, only 7 of them actually had an offer from any medical school, right? They've been rejected all over the map. And when they actually did this, and they actually researched what happened later, how was the performance of these students, there was no actual distinguishable difference between the 50 who came late and the 150 who came early. That means that everything that they were doing to select people was literally nothing, right? Like, they had done nothing. And in fact, the researchers went on and said, well, what fraction maybe isn't the interviewer's fault? Maybe it's like, oh, you know, they have different academic performance. We can sort of attribute that some credit. It was about 28% of the rankings came from that academic performance, some sort of quantitative numbers. And the remaining, about 75%, came from just how people felt in unstructured interviews, right? It was literally like people walked into a room, talked to someone, and they were like, nah, I don't really like this person, right? So bias is serious. We do all these best practices to avoid it at Wayfair, but I just want to point out that that's not the point of the talk. What is the point of the talk is that almost every company I've ever been at, when I actually ask, well, how do we measure if our interviews are effective, everyone is like, well, we don't, right? Like, we sync up on individual people, and then we make decisions, and then we hope they work out. And that seems weird to me. Like, we spend a massive amount of time, we constantly try and train people to do this, we have all these problems with bias, and yet we don't actually measure anything. And I want to make sure we understand how serious a problem this is. So let's imagine there's some sort of scale here between poor and outstanding performance. And there's somewhere we might call the quote-unquote bar, which is like we would accept candidates past this point. And at any given point, we might have an interviewer come in, and maybe that's what they're going to perform at that day, right? But our interviewer who goes into the room with them might have some bias. So they might evaluate them there and say they're past the bar. And this is basically where most people end the conversation about the performance in their interviews. They're like, oh, we got to combat that bias, right? But this is a sort of uncomplicated and unrealistic picture of how people actually are. In reality, if we had been able to redo that interview for that interviewee on many different occasions, under many circumstances, they might have performed differently, right? And the reason for that is simple. Like, they're humans, they have lives, maybe they were hungry, maybe they were stressed, maybe they got in a car accident, you know, all these sorts of things could be happening. Or maybe they just got a raise, right? They could be really happy that day, and they could do better than they should have done on average. It gets a little worse. Interviewers are also humans. They also have some distributions that follow them around, right? And interviewers are data scientists. They're often very busy, so they're running from one meeting to this interview. They're not well prepped maybe one day, or some days they're like, wow, I just got a raise, like I'm in a great mood, I feel energetic, and things go well, right? So there's actually a lot of noise in this process. And when we combine these two distributions, what we should actually expect is that in any given interview, there's a huge amount of noise. Unfortunately, we don't get to see that distribution. What we actually get is maybe this evaluation, or this one, or that one, right? If we could actually redo the interview, that's what we would get. And if this wasn't bad enough, there's actually another source of noise in the process. which is that the panels that are put together for interviews have different interviewers, all of whom may have different biases and noise distributions about how they actually think candidates perform. So if you were a candidate coming in and you had got to choose between panel 1 and panel 2 with full information, which would you choose? Well, I would hope you'd choose panel 2, because there's actually significantly more probability distribution there that it would skew positive, right? And you would be more likely to actually get an offer. So what can we do to assess this noise, right? And sort of off the cuff, I could come up with 3 big things that we could do. So the first is that we could hire a troupe of actors, right? Like, actors aren't that expensive. I could hire a troupe of them to go and perform data science interviews in a consistent way and see what happened. Bad news with that, interviews are very interactive. Data science is a very specialized field. It would take a lot of work to actually make interviewers believable. And data scientists aren't stupid. They actually talk to each other. They'd be like, wait, why are you interviewing that same person? I just saw them, right? That would be unfortunate. So another option is we could invent a time machine. I mean, if I had a time machine, I wouldn't need to do most of my job. I could just go back and retry things, right? Unfortunately, I was a physicist. Time machine's still a long ways off. And that leaves the third solution, which is hopefully doing data science, right? We can try and actually model out what is the effect of the interviewers compared to other factors that go into the interview. And why does this all matter? It matters because when you're getting to over 100 people, you often get in questions and debates about, are we being fair? Are we setting a uniform bar? If we got audited today and someone asks, have you actually tracked that you're not being biased, would that be true? Right? And of course, that means we should all care about this, and at Wayfair we do care about it. But it's an important question. And so the first thing we decided to do to address this is simply to ask, are we agreeing with each other? When candidates come in, and we assess them across a panel of interviewers, if they're strong candidates, shouldn't we normally agree with each other that they're strong candidates? And to do this, we used a relatively complicated metric called Krippendorff's alpha. And I'm not going to go into explaining exactly how this works, but it accounts for things like distance metrics and scorings, and observed coincidences versus noise coincidences that might happen at random. And it doesn't require me to have all the interviewers interview every candidate. It's an inter-rater reliability metric. And here's the punchline. We had an inter-rater agreement of about 0.3, which in terms of 0 to 1, which is the scale of Krippendorff's alpha, is considered slight agreement. So we were doing a bit better than random, but not that well. And that should scare us, right? Like, we were scared. We were like, wait a second. What are we doing? And so then we got into a much deeper problem, which is we know we're disagreeing, so how can we actually assess interviewer performance? And in order to understand what we're going to do and look at in the future, I'm going to use a very simple example that's somewhat related. And this is, imagine that you have thousands of coins, and they come from different countries, from different mints. And you want to ask, what is the probability of each of the coins of landing heads, right? Now, unfortunately, let's suppose you have 5 minutes. So you don't get to flip the coins as much as you would like. You can't flip them all thousands of times and get very nice tight confidence intervals. What can you actually do? And the answer is you can build a model, right? So you can basically say, I'm going to build a sort of Bayesian model, and I'm going to say, like, OK, my core hyperprior is coins tend to be fair. I think that's generally common sense, right? Like, coins tend to be fair. Like, most of us don't encounter that many deeply unfair coins. But then I might be like, well, the factory might actually matter. So the coin hyperprior informs a factory hyperprior, right? And this, in turn, affects the coins distributions, which in turn are informed by the coin flip observations, however many of them I have for each coin. And building a model like this and actually running it would be terribly difficult if I was a human. It turns out a computer can do this in about 3 minutes, right? And ta-da, beautiful distributions. We can get true rates on all of these wonderful coins as far as we can tell, and we can actually ask, are any of them different, right? So that's awesome. And now let's try and take this sort of methodology and go to a real example. So we decided to start with phone screens. Why did we start with phone screens? So we start with phone screens because we get additional data after the phone screen. If someone gets passed to the onsite, we get to reevaluate them. And we had noticed a trend that we kept getting sort of strong no. What do I mean by strong no? I mean interviews in which everyone would come back and be like, that candidate was terrible. Why did we actually let them go forward? And that's a lot of time that we were burning interviewing bad candidates. So we were like, this seems like low-hanging fruit. We can actually examine it. And so we went through and we built our model, and we actually, for all of our phone screeners, went through and evaluated how are they performing. And this is what we got, OK? And so this is basically like, how likely are these phone screeners to pass on someone who is going to get a strong consensus no? And the first thing we were very encouraged by is there's a lot of this that is uniform, right? Like a lot of this is basically essentially flat. But there are some people who in fact were passing on more candidates than we would like, who were in fact strong no's. So that was interesting, but then we immediately realized, well, we have all this data. Like, what about just like the pass rate? Like, people can make there be not strong no candidates by just passing no one. So we did that one too. Turns out once again that, okay, we're doing okay, but actually there's some people who literally, like, you don't want to get them as a phone screener. They're going to give you a very bad rating, statistically. And there are some people who are a bit generous, right? And we want to watch and sort of work on those people too. And so what do we do at this point? So now we have some information. We decided, well, let's actually try something, right? Like, let's try retraining these people. So we have a program of interview training at Wayfair that you do when you first start. And then somehow, I don't know why we assumed this, but we assumed then you were magically calibrated and you went off and you never had a problem again. You would never go out of calibration. Years later, you would still be perfectly calibrated with everyone. If anything had changed, well, I don't know. We didn't have a solution. So we actually decided to retrain people. And preliminary results from the retraining have been very positive. We've actually started to get these people to be back where they should be. But I should point out a key point of the retraining is we never tell people if they're too generous or too harsh in their interviews. Because if you do that, what they inevitably do is react. And in the next set of interviews, they'll just say the opposite because they're like, oh, I'm going to be too nice. I can't be nice to this person, right? So we never actually tell people where they are. We just essentially say we have randomized retrainings, right? And we do, in fact, select some people who are just good people in the sense of the statistical distribution who get a retraining as well. And that seems to be working pretty well. But now we decided we want to go a little bit farther, right? So we decided we're going to actually tackle the interview process. And this is the distribution we had for our interview process. And once again, things got messy, right? And we discovered, actually, there's a large number of people who are very generous. And there's a decent number of people who are not very generous. And I just want to point out, like, if you actually got a panel of 4 of those people on the far right of this slide versus 4 of the people on the far left of this slide, your chances of getting an offer were massively increased, okay? Independent of who you actually were, right? Even more interestingly, the model can tell us about the variability we might expect for each of those people given the data we already have, right? And it turns out there's a fair amount of variability, right? Why? Why is there so much variability in the interview process, right? And one of the best parts of having data is you can ask questions like that. You can actually regress on other variables and ask what else might be influencing the interview process. And so we did that. And so this is a very fun one. So this is our interview pass rate by level. And you might imagine, as I would have naively, that it probably gets harsher as you go up in level. And that's true until you reach about the middle levels. Then it gets easier again. We actually pass more candidates who are higher levels. So if you're very low level or you're very high level, we were very nice to you, essentially, compared to where we were saying mid-level people needed to be. And there's actually a very good intuition about that, which is those people in the purple distribution here are the people who might come in and be line managers of the data science teams, right? And being a line manager, I've done it. It is a rough job for anyone out there who's doing it. You are the salt of the earth. We appreciate you. It's wonderful. But when we interview them, the people who were ICs, who were like, this might be my manager, were like, they need to be technically better than I am, right? Like, otherwise, why are they my manager? They should be technically stronger than I am. So they would be like, well, in the interview, they didn't seem as strong as I was. No. And then we'd have the inverse, right? Like the senior leaders would be like, well, they have to have all this leadership potential. They're going to be leading a team. They've got a coach. We need to have all this understanding of like how they're going to grow and how the org is going to change. And so the leaders would be like, technically strong, but they're not ready to be a leader, right? And you had these two competing functions. So you'd be like, well, these are two largely independent skill sets. It's very unfair to expect someone to be perfect at both of them, right? And so inevitably, people in the middle actually sort of struggle. And so what are we actually doing to combat this? So what we're doing is we're changing our rubrics around who actually and how actually we evaluate people in that middle bucket, right? So that what we try and do, instead of saying, for instance, you got to know, sorry, you're out of luck, We actually are saying, well, you got one no and the others seem good, right? From the feedback that happened, does it seem coachable, right? Can we coach this one part of it? And the answer is normally yes, right? And then we use that to actually evaluate whether we should make an offer. And we call that system interview counsel. So we actually have a thing now where every week we go through all of the candidates that were interviewed, and we go through on each of them, on each of the sort of questions they were asked, what was their performance, right? We look at both what was the person's judgment that they had to write originally, as well as all the notes they had to write from the interview about why they put that judgment. And then we actually do that for each of the candidates and each of the questions that were asked, and we try and come to a consensus. And senior leaders all attend this, right? So like myself, everyone at my level, all the bosses, everyone attends this, right? And it's a core way that we try and actually socialize how do we set the bar. So this has been working really well, but there is something very humorous, which is you put up people's ratings, right? You say like, okay, like, so-and-so said yes, and so-and-so said yes, and so-and-so said no, and so-and-so said no. And lo and behold, in the meeting, they all sync together, right? They're all like, oh, it sounds like you're seeing exactly what I was, but like, it's okay, like, and you're like, okay, so like we're losing information there, right? So one of the core things is the people who actually are doing the interview only get about half the voice in whether we actually make the hire now, right? So another senior leader who wasn't involved in the panel reads the feedback and has another vote about whether we should actually make a hire, right? Because they are a neutral party. They don't really care, right? They're like, well, whatever, this isn't going to be on my team. So they get the vote on whether we should actually allow this candidate to move forward or not, whether we're going to make an offer. And so that's something we've been doing to sort of tackle this problem as well. And so that's sort of the end of what I want to talk about, but I do want to talk about a few other things that we're doing to sort of highlight that there are other potentials out there. So the first thing I just want to say is, if you're not collecting data on your historical interview performance, you are literally crazy, right? You are literally taking what should be the most important part of your company, right? The people who are actually going to drive results and make your business successful, and you're not actually asking any questions you could be asking with a model about what they're doing, right, and how they're doing it. Even worse, if you're not doing interview correlation to historical performance that you then get, you can't even ask, is our hiring finding the candidates that we need, right? Oftentimes, none of this is tracked. The next thing I want to say is you really do need to measure if you're hitting the bar that you're aiming for, and if you actually have a bar. In our case, when we did the first measurement, we didn't have a bar. We had a number of bars essentially equal to the number of interviewers who were involved in the interviewing process, right? And that's not shocking, right? We all talk about the bar, but they had no way to know whether they were actually well calibrated to other people, right? And so that's one of the core things. Did you actually have to say, like, what is our bar, and are we going to measure if we're hitting it? And in fact, in one case, in our code screening interviews, we decided we were being too easy. The bar was too low, right? And we actually did an intervention where we had to retrain everyone on new coding questions to raise the bar, right? And we're now measuring whether we actually raised the bar, and preliminary results are actually not that great. It turns out it's really hard to make humans change, right? Like, they tend to be like, well, I don't want to make people feel bad, so I kind of help them out a little bit, but it's okay, I think they'd be great. And so we still have to tackle this. It's a very hard question. And we'll probably have to do another round of trainings to try and get at this. So just to cap it off, what are some useful interventions that you could be trying once you actually have data? The first is shadowing and retraining, as I've already talked about. The next is interview counsels. They cost very little. They cost us about a 30-minute meeting a week. In terms of meeting time, that is almost nothing compared to what I spend to just get a candidate through the pipeline, right, or what the company spends. And they have proven very useful. We've had multiple candidates where, like, before the interview counsel, people would have been like, definitely yes or definitely no, and then the independent reviewer is like, well, what about this point that someone said, right? And suddenly that unspools into this huge thing that turns out to change how we view the candidate, right? And that's really important. And this feeds into the third point, which is note-taking and documentation. For some reason, I don't understand this, but for some reason, and this was true at all the companies I've worked at, there was a culture of not taking any notes in the interview. Isn't that weird? Like, here you are, you're talking to a person, you're going to be there for an hour. Are you going to remember what they said? No, you're going to remember a few things. You're going to walk out, you're going to be like, oh, I got to run to that other meeting. And then you're going to be like, oh no, what's going on? Like, I don't remember that much. Oh, I remember these few high points, right? Like, that's okay. Or I remember this one really bad point, right? And that's how you'll make your judgment. So what we now do is we actually push our interviewers to take notes during the interview. And I should point out, this is very important. You have to train people how to take notes in an interview. I was once in an interview where someone took notes, and it's not that hard to read handwriting upside down. And they were writing like, good answer, bad answer, right? And I was like, I can read what you're writing. Like, I'm not an idiot. So make sure they actually take notes about what is happening, not what their opinion is at the moment. And then the final thing, which we're now investigating, is can we actually build an algorithm, either through people or through actual software. So the first place we're starting out on this is we're investigating, can we build an algorithm that will actually do resume review, right? Resume review is it's the worst job in the world. You like look at these resumes, you're like, I don't know, why do they do that? But it turns out that an algorithm doesn't mind spending 7 hours looking at resumes, right? It doesn't mind if it, like instead of going through, Wayfair gets tens of thousands of applications through its online thing every day, instead of being like, oh, some human has to like go through those for keywords, right? Like, an algorithm can just rate those all. We can find the best candidates based on what they actually wrote. So that's what we're working on now, is actually building an algorithm in order to get to where we want to be. And that's basically it. So my general principle, as it always has been, is you cannot change anything you do not measure, right? And measurement isn't enough to change, right? So step 1, measure, assess accurately if you're doing what you want to do in your interviews. And I hope that you find slightly more encouraging results at first than we found, but they are changeable with time. Thank you very much.